A word of fair warning, this is a very long video where I go into in-depth discussions about the narratives of DE, my opinion on them, my overall concerns and outlook going forward. So to those of you who subscribe to this channel for entertaining memes, this is a completely different side of me. I don't really enjoy making this type of video, but given the circumstances, I feel that I have to speak up about it. This video is a follow-up to my previous video, which talked about DE's recent decision to temporarily shut down trials at the end of February and my criticisms of the initial news. In that video, I did mention that I would probably make a follow-up video after Devstream 106, in which DE offered to show a quote-unquote raw view on their actions. Now, even if you do not play or enjoy Warframe's trials, I hope that you will still give me a listen, because I believe DE's recent behavior is cause for concern, not only for trial players, but all of Warframe's players and veterans. In this video, I will not talk so much about my own channel because I already covered that in my previous video, and this video is already super long and So the contents of this video are as follows: addressing DE's uninformative Devstream coverage of the removal of raids, addressing DE's narrative that Eidolons are a replacement for trials, and addressing their justification for this narrative, that it is because Eidolons require the same kind of teamwork or coordination as trials. Other practical reasons outside of DE's narrative as to why Eidolons are not a replacement for the social and unique gameplay value of the trials. Response to some of the community comments and mindsets to my earlier response video. Concerns about how Eidolons and PoE in general is handled as a game mode. Concerns about DE's recent actions and how this affects every Warframe player. And last of all, going forward, I have some suggestions to DE to not only remedy the situation, but potentially even turn this whole situation around and create a win-win situation for both DE and the trial community.
Oh, one really exciting thing. You guys are going to love this.
Now, let us begin with Devstream 106. In the initial forum post where the first announcement of trials being removed, DE Megan wrote this: Devstream 106 this Friday will have a raw view on our decision to temporarily remove trials. We as humans and also players of Warframe feel bad about having trials out there unsupported, but we can feel your emotions on the decision to temporarily remove them as well. This gave the raid community some semblance of hope that during the Devstream itself there would be some kind of further discussion or back and forth conversation about the trials that would, give the community the answers it needed. The community in general was hoping for statistics, timelines, concrete plans for the step-by-step rebuilding of raids. And unfortunately, during the Devstream, we got none of that. What we got was essentially 3 minutes of DE repeating the same responses without addressing any of the concerns that we had raised in the forum post, or adding any new information or dimension to the issue.
Do we have any sort of hope to give them, anything to talk about, or do we just hope that they can understand that we just can't support this content type as it stands and we want to replace it with something more refreshed in design? Or should they feel that, that sort of same style of gameplay just won't come back?
I wouldn't say it's not coming back. I think it needs to be rethought and fit better with the Warframe universe and the Warframe as a game.
There were no statistics or further information given out about the future of trials. No timeline for when they would be restored, no plans for how they would be restored, and there was no roadmap for how it would be approached at all. Furthermore, no further effort was made by DE to communicate or address the community's concerns on any platform. There was nothing on Twitter, there was nothing on Facebook, there was nothing on Reddit, there was nothing on the forums, and there was nothing on the Devstream chat. It was just a completely one-sided conversation where DE essentially just said the same thing and didn't add anything of value to the Trials community. And this was incredibly disappointing. I did mention in my previous video that I was waiting on this Devstream so that hopefully Digital Extremes, would dispense more information and I could actually talk about it, and, maybe we would have something as a trial community going forward. Unfortunately, that has not changed at all since there has been no new information per se. So with that said, I find that it is now appropriate for me to talk at length and analyze a lot of what DE has said in detail and provide in-depth analysis on it, as well as addressing the problems where they pop up. The reason I didn't do this earlier was because I was hoping that the Devstream would provide more answers to some of the questions that I had, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, no, so here we are. Let's talk about the first thing, which is Digital Extremes' narrative that Eidolons are a replacement for Trials. So the first thing I want to address is what Digital Extremes has offered to the Trials community as part of its actions. The idea or a narrative that Eidolons are a sufficient substitute or replacement for the Trials that are about to be removed. In the forum post, the Megan mentioned this. Taking down a terror list mirrors the tactics of a trial in terms of teamwork and communication. As part of its plans to temporarily remove Trials, DE has planned to move Arcane rewards into the Eidolons as well. The overall narrative DE seems to be giving here is that because Eidolons somehow mirror Trials, it will suffice as a substitute to Trials, and they seem to expect the Trials community to just jump ship. Something I need to drive home is that Trials and Eidolons are very different types of content. I will demonstrate this later, and they can coexist. They are not overlaps of the same thing. One does not need to be removed because it is taking players from the other. To suggest that the two types of content mirror each other in terms of tactics required either A, demonstrates a very poor understanding of their own game mechanics, or if DE somehow expects the trial community to swallow this narrative, a very poor understanding and respect for its veteran communities. So let me start by pointing out how Eidolons and Trials are not the same thing, and they do not mirror each other. Eidolons are primarily a gear check, compared to the knowledge and comms check that Trials are. As I stated in my previous video, Eidolons take good amps, very strict Warframe lineups, and heavily format critical weapons to begin with to take them down efficiently before the night ends. Trials, on the other hand, they punish poor communications, such as stepping off pads early in Stage 2 Law of Retribution, which either resets the puzzle or shocks the hijack core, and if you shock it too much, it actually blows up and causes a failure. Good equipment in a trial is optimal, but it is not required to finish the raid, and it does not affect the quality or quantity of the final reward. The main factor where communications affects Eidolon hunting is simply the speed of the runs. Good communication during hunts will shave time off your runs, allowing you to do more runs a night. But it does not really affect whether or not you fail the hunt, unless your team really sucks and takes more than 50 minutes to finish a single hunt. Now, Eidolon hunting is also very singular in its objective. It basically revolves around dealing as much damage to the Eidolon, and in very specific ways. You have to shoot the weak spots after removing the shields with your operator. There is no other way to go around doing this. And make sure that your teammates, the Leos and yourself, don't die to the multitude of AoE damage that the Eidolons throw out constantly and almost randomly. Unlike Trials, where you are given a puzzle and given free rein to achieve it in any way you please, the Eidolons are a very guided experience where you have to do certain things a certain way. Now, on top of this, in an Eidolon hunt, you are limited to 4 players. There is very little, if not no wiggle room in terms of meta and optimal setups. This player limit also means that every player has to pull their weight in terms of their operator and weapon DPS and their constant support, as well as their healing or damage mitigation. Now, another point I want to make is that the options for dealing with an Eidolon are incredibly limited. This is because the Eidolons are immune to all Warframe debuffs, which instantly removes 2 Warframe archetypes, which is debuff and CC. So this just tightens the meta into either damage, buffer type support, or healer type support. Frames like Banshee, for example, are completely useless against the Eidolon, as Sonar weak spots don't work on the Eidolon, and hence her most powerful damage amplification skill is completely nullified. CC frames are completely useless against the Eidolon as well. Loki, for example, can't disarm the Eidolon, and so on and so forth. And frames like Ember are suboptimal, because even though she can buff teammates with Fireball Frenzy, her accelerant debuff does not work against the Eidolon. Another thing is that Eidolons are immune to most status procs except for Void, which is the operator amp status proc, which is, kind of like a mini magnetized bubble. This makes status weapons and condition overload completely useless against them, meaning that the only way to deal large amounts of damage to an Eidolon is with critical weapons. Now that we have set forth all these limitations of what can or cannot be done in a Eidolon run, something to note is that min-maxing is absolutely crucial for Eidolon hunting, because it is time gated to 50 minutes every night cycle. An experienced and min-max team can do 10 or even more terror lists a night, and as of now they can do the trio, which is the terror list, gauntlet list, and hydra list twice in a night, which is about 25 minutes or less per trio run. Unlike Trials, in Eidolon hunting, the quantity of rewards is based on the number of runs you can cram into one night. For comparison, a public team that is cobbled together from either recruit chat or just blindly joining the planes can at best do 5 runs a night. That's about it. The gear requirement for Trials, however, is a lot less strict than Eidolons. For example, a beginner with a basic Rhino and with overextended and stretch for range, casting Stomp in a Law of Retribution can pretty much do the whole raid. The gear requirements for a trial are far less stringent than those in Eidolons. To anyone who supports the idea that Eidolons require actual team communication or a lot of teamwork compared to Trials, someone has already soloed the 3 Eidolons on the first day of the Shrine of Eidolons release. The link is in the description. Now, I have played quite a few MMORPGs or action-adventure games in my time. Warframe is the first game where on release day of something that is intended to be done as a group activity, someone solos it. Now, there's a problem in that in itself, which means that, the content isn't hard, but it also means that you don't really need team communication. The trials, unlike the Eidolons, actually need some basic level of understanding and puzzle solving to complete. As much as standing on a pad simulator is a common and valid criticism of trials, by the way, standing on puzzle pads isn't the most fun thing in the world, but it is also one of the unique gameplay aspects of the trials that requires thinking and logical reaction. Whereas in the case of Eidolons, you're just similar to the rest of the game, you're essentially just coasting through bullet sponge gameplay with a powerful gun. Sometimes you require a healer or damage mitigation. Now that I have addressed the technical differences between the trial and the Eidolon in terms of, the mechanics required, and I hopefully convinced you that the two function of very different types of player and equipment interaction, allow me to move on to more subtle differences that make Eidolons difficult to substitute trials in a Warframe veteran's regular play. So, the first difference is that Eidolons are time-gated and the trials are not. The trials don't force you to do them in a specific order, at certain times of the day, or a specific amount of time. One of the reasons trials was a good community activity for veterans such as myself is because my raid team and I could set a fixed time every single day and start raiding at that time. It was something you could easily base your whole schedule around. Now, with Eidolons, your runs are dependent on the seater's time cycle. Keep in mind that each day-night cycle is 150 minutes. 100 minutes day, 50 minutes night. This is 2 hours and 30 minutes. Meaning that unlike a trial team, the start of the Eidolon cycle every single day shifts around. If you divide a 24-hour cycle by 2.5, you are left with 9.6. Meaning that a 24-hour cycle does not start with the day and end with a night. The minimum amount of time required to have a night cycle start at the exact same time again is 5 days. For example, my raid team always assembles at 9 PM Singapore time to raid. And we can delay or start earlier based on how many people we have and who is ready. Maybe if you need to wait 5 minutes for someone, we can do that. Our start times are not dependent on some in-game game cycle. Now, if I were to start an Eidolon hunting team with the same principle, let's say day 1, I start at 9 PM and the night ends at 9:50 PM. Okay, let's suppose there is such a circumstance. The next day, however, because the 2.5-hour cycles don't fit perfectly into a 24-hour cycle, the next day, the night cycle within my time frame will either start 1.5 hours earlier at 7:30 PM, which is plus 22.5 hours, or 1 hour later at 10 PM, which is plus 25 hours. So this makes it incredibly frustrating to base a daily activity around, as the start times of the hunts change every day. Part of the reason why I bonded so well with my raid team friends is because it was easy to organize around and it became almost a sort of daily ritual for us. In the case of Eidolons, I need to look at the in-game timer and see whether or not I can do Eidolon runs or not. Now, second point. The trials can be extremely fun by themselves, if only to break the standard 4-player limit of the rest of Warframe's gameplay. Now, in my earlier video, I had a few commenters detailing upon their experiences of how they had more than 3 friends playing Warframe and that the trials allowed all of them to play together. And some other content creators, such as Triburos, despite their complete incompetency at raids, have managed to make extremely entertaining videos simply out of doing trials as an activity where they mess around with a bunch of friends. The 8-player limit in trials allows players to escape the monotony that is the usual 4-player cap. A good example of this is my 8 speedrun video, which involved 8 players stacking as many speed buffs onto a Nerja and achieving max power speed, which is far beyond the kinds of speed that you can attain with just 4 Warframes. Now, besides all the silly shenanigans in my videos, which result from combining 8 Warframes powers, the trials are an incredibly valuable resource as a social side activity, which allows large groups of friends to play together or have fun in a larger social space than the game usually permits. Now, with the removal of trials, this avenue of fun is gone. There currently exists no other content in this game that exceeds 4-player squads. Moving on, I would like to address DE's moving of Arcane rewards to Eidolons after they believe that the Eidolons replace trials narrative was justification. Something I want to point out was that one of the most mind-boggling lines that Scott made during the Devstream was this.
I think the fact that Arcanes were cornered in a very hardcore market of the world was kind of a mistake at the time.
As a justification for moving Arcanes to Eidolons, this isn't just confusing. It feels like they're repeating their mistakes. For the very intensive gear and type meta requirements I stated earlier for Eidolon hunting, I find it very likely that Eidolon teams will become an extremely hardcore community of their own. While you could argue that PoE's high player base will offset this, we will still probably see some kind of scenario where the arcane market is controlled by a relatively small handful of individuals. This handful may be larger due to the player base, but it's still in control of a hardcore bunch of players. The thing I really don't understand is why they are moving Arcanes from one hardcore community to another and somehow expecting things to change. Now, if the intent was to make Arcanes more widely available, then moving it into a game mode that enforces stringent gear checks was probably the wrong move, since the supply is still relatively strangled. Now, I know what you have to say. Admittedly, I don't know and we don't know how arcane drops from Eidolons will work. We don't know if they are time gated to a limited number a day, like trials, or if you can farm as many of them as you possibly can. We don't know if they are direct guaranteed drops from Eidolons or they are just RNG chance drops. We don't know if the arcanes drop completed or as blueprints that you need to craft. However, if you want my personal opinion in this, I am guessing that DE will make it a blueprint that requires Eidolon gems, Radiant shards, and Breaths of the Eidolon to craft because they like to enforce Plains grind on people. They can't help themselves but make you play Plains more. The arcane doesn't even drop completed in my opinion. Now, keep in mind that while the larger player base accessing Eidolons will probably increase the overall supply of arcanes in the market, the majority of the supply will still be throttled by small groups who are min-maxed to the teeth, with amps, unbounds, frames, crit-driven guns, so on and so forth. Since these are the individuals who can grind out the most arcanes a night, regardless of how arcanes drop. This means we'll probably be back at square one, where a very hardcore community was in control of the majority supply of arcanes. So Scott's justification is incredibly mind-boggling, as it is unlikely to solve the supposed problem that they set out to solve, make arcanes more accessible and uncorner the market. By moving arcanes from a knowledge check wall to behind a massive gear check wall, you're just shifting the problem around without actually solving the root cause. Now, I would love to be actually proven wrong on this point. I would like to see the arcane market become less crowded by elites. But given the way it's being treated, I feel it's very unlikely. Now, with all that said and done, I want to wrap up my discussion on Eidolons versus trials. Essentially what I am saying is this. It is incredibly patronizing to the trials community when you remove trials and offer them this activity that is clearly not a replacement for it. If DE wants to tell us that they don't want to put resources into trials anymore, that is fine. If they want to tell us they would like to focus on making new Eidolons for now, that is also fine. But please don't try to sell me and the rest of the community this idea that Eidolons are a replacement for what we are about to lose, because for all the reasons listed above, this is clearly not true. There are similarities between the two, such as requiring team composition, specific frames modded for specific roles and strategies, and communication, making runs faster, but that's kind of where the similarities between the two game modes end. By offering the Trials community something that is clearly not a substitute, you are not placating or consoling us. It only comes off as patronizing and insulting. Moving on, I would like to respond to some types of responses that I have been getting on my previous video. The first one is this, that the Trials community is toxic or elitist, and with the removal of raids, good riddance to this community. There is some truth to this. Recruitment chat raids are often accused of elitism. They often refuse to take on new and inexperienced players, or discriminate against certain frame choices or builds. They also use public raid records from sites such as Warframe.Crystex or Trials.Warframe as a means to measure individuals' competency, largely because in a pub setting, nobody wants to bring a person with a history of failures along. To understand why they do this, a knowledgeable player can be the difference between a fast and efficient run or a painfully slow one that could fail. For example, in JV, if you have one or two very knowledgeable players who know exactly how to do the nerfs, you can easily do 20 minutes or less runs, while a whole team of incompetent players in JV will likely find themselves playing spore football for 50 over minutes while re-entering the tunnels over and over again and losing revives. So yes, elitist Trials people do exist. And yes, they do give the Trials community a bad name. However, they do not represent the entirety of the Trials community. And, moreover, recruit chat interactions tend to be toxic and rife with the usual problems of public matchmaking. For you to state that the entire Trials community is toxic is not only an overgeneralization, but it also shows laziness on your part. It shows that you clearly did not go out of your way to look for other trial communities before making such a statement. An extension of this problem is that whatever toxicity and bad experiences that you are encountering with the Trials community and recruit chat is not going to go away when Trials get removed. It is likely to be far worse once Arcanes get moved to Eidolons. As I have earlier stated, the far tighter player count and gear requirements of Eidolon hunting are likely to encourage far more elitism and prejudice than Trials. Simply because for the sake of efficiency, an Eidolon hunting squad will demand that you check way more boxes than the ones required for Trials. In a community like the Raid School Bus, Trials can be done with a skeleton crew of 2 to 4 veterans, and they can bring up to 4 to 5 newbies and teach them, and there is no penalty for long run times, and they can step by step teach the newbies. Such a community is either unlikely to surface in the Eidolon hunting community, or it will be very difficult to run such a community simply because nobody wants to gimp their Eidolon hunting efficiency and run times in a time-gated event by giving up a well-equipped player in favor of bringing along a completely new player with no good equipment. The point I'm making is this: the removal of raids will not solve toxicity in recruit chat. The way Eidolons are set up makes them far more susceptible to toxicity and elitist behavior than Trials. So don't be surprised or come back to me crying when you realize that Trials being removed solved none of the toxicity issues and instead intensified the toxicity in the Eidolon hunting community. Now, the next type of response I got was, I hate raids and I'm glad they are going away. Now, these types of comments depress me because if you don't like something, fine. You are entitled to your opinion and nobody is forcing you to like it. However, to go out of your way to wish death or celebrate the death of a game mode that you do not like, while it did not really affect your normal gameplay or enjoyment of the game, is pretty disgusting behavior. For example, I do not like Conclave. I don't like how you never find a full squad of players if pubbing, and I don't like how when you actually do find a squad, the game has no real elo system. You usually get match made with a Conclave god with thousands of hours of experience and just get pub stomped. And I don't like how some parts of its community treat people trying to get into their circle like complete horseshit. However, you do not see me going around advocating for the death of Conclave, simply because I understand that it has its own tight-knit communities and friendships that would be torn apart if the game mode was deleted from the game. The point being, even if you don't like something, have a little empathy and try to think of those being affected. Are you going to support the removal of everything that you don't enjoy in this game? And what happens if one day the content being removed in question is one that you do enjoy? Response number 3. You shouldn't have banked your content on raids. Now, hindsight is 20/20. I built most of this channel on raids because I wanted to make something that was unique. And the Trials 8-man player limit enabled me to do a lot of fun or dumb stuff that made for very entertaining moments. I personally also don't enjoy making generic Warframe partner content like weapon reviews in the Simulacrum, so I clearly didn't base my channel on that. To say that I shouldn't have done what makes my channel unique over the past 2 years, simply because of what is happening to it only recently and after the announcement of what's going to happen to it, is a pretty stupid statement in itself, since it completely ignores the virtue of my content and everything I have built myself and my communities upon. Point number 4. It's only a temporary removal. Stop overreacting. Under any other developer, I would say you are right. However, knowing DE's past history, the last time something was removed and said to be coming back was 3 years ago, to Dark Sectors. Only now are Dark Sectors coming back in the Devstream as an extremely rough build that is completely different from the original iteration of Dark Sectors. Temporarily in DE time could mean 3 years or more. At this point, without further roadmaps or timelines, the raid community is essentially asked to put faith in an indefinite period of time that their content is out of the game. This is not okay. As a developer that claims that it cares about the passionate trial community, this is an incredibly vague answer that it cannot expect any reasonably passionate community to accept. Hence, the calls to DE for further answers, which they did not answer in their initial forum post, nor the Devstream where it was hoped that they would be answered. As far as the current situation is concerned, temporarily can mean indefinitely or even permanently if down the line DE changes its mind and decides, you know what, trials aren't worth redeveloping. Keep in mind that DE also has a massive back burner log of things that were talked about in dev streams that still haven't become a reality, such as Nef Anyo rework or the Syndicate Kingpin systems. It even took 2 years for Excalibur Umbra to even reach TennoCon. So forgive me if I seem unwilling to trust DE on prioritizing trials over all their other shelved or postponed stuff.
For a lot of people, when we use the word temporary to describe the removal of trials, there's obviously, if you followed us for 5 years of Devstream history, that word can mean a lot of different things depending on the context. Temporary, sometimes the meme right now is DE, temporary is permanent. And the reference they're using for this is the Dark Sectors.
Point number 5. You shouldn't criticize the game if you love it. Now, this in itself is also a really flawed piece of logic. If you love something, you should criticize it. If someone you love in real life is doing something wrong, or doing something wrongly that could in the future cause an accident that causes them to hurt themselves, you point it out. You point it out because you want them to be a better person, and you point it out because you want them to improve. If you don't point out the problems as you see them, they will never know that they are doing things wrongly and will continue making the same mistakes. I criticize this game because I love it. If I didn't care about this game, I would not criticize it as much as I do. And I criticize this game because I want it to be better. Point number 6 insinuates that there are way worse developers and therefore you shouldn't criticize DE. Something that was raised in my comments and other parts of the community was that we as Warframe players have it good. Because compared to some AAA developers out there, DE listens to us and doesn't treat us like shit. There is a bit of truth to this. DE is way more receptive to feedback and has generally nice business practices compared to the rest of the gaming development community. You know, some examples commonly raised are like Bungie, on how they sometimes completely ignore feedback and don't care about broken things in their Destiny games, like the Thorn in PvP, or how EA is literally Satan, you know, in all kinds of games that it takes over. And yes, I would say compared to these developers, DE looks like a saint. However, this does not make them immune to criticism, nor does it excuse bad behavior. Bad behavior by a good developer is still bad behavior, and it should be called as it is. Now that I have addressed and hopefully gotten the responses out of the way, I want to address further concerns with how the Eidolons are being handled. There's still problems with the Vomvalis spawns, which were the traditional bottleneck for most Eidolon speedrunning teams. This has still not been fixed. They are still tied to the spawn cap of all entities in planes, which makes their spawns erratic at times, and you are often still left waiting around for a Vomvalis to charge your lures before you hurt the Eidolons. The another point is the Eidolon lures still self-destruct without warning or grace periods once the night cycle ends, even before the Eidolon fully retreats, making for very frustrating runs, especially if your team barely does not make it in time. For example, Headshot recently lost a Hydralisk capture by 10 seconds because of this, which wasted his Brilliant and Radiant shards. Given how the Eidolon Gauntlet is set up to be a high-risk, high-reward system because you have to sacrifice your drops from the previous Eidolon to summon the new one, you would at least think fair warning would be given so that you can kind of try to preempt and try to prevent losing the capture, or that the lure would only self-destruct once an Eidolon had fully retreated. Another point I want to bring up is that the two new Eidolons, in my opinion, feel incredibly lazily designed. It's basically the Terrorist with more health, more weak spots, and more AoE damage that can only be dealt with efficiently with damage mitigation frames, as well as a lot more visual chaos. Compared to the Terrorist, there is really no extra element of teamwork and coordination required. Now, if DE had added in actual teamwork elements, let's say if the new Eidolon were to charge up some kind of super AoE attack that did a lot of damage. Now, if you could prevent this super attack when it was charging it by shooting two different weak spots on its body at the same time, which would then not only shut down the attack and then open it to more damage or instantly drain its shields, which would reward your team for quick thinking and cooperation, then yes, I would say there is some truth to trial-like coordination. Another point I want to put forth is no effort at all was put into the new Eidolon matchmaking. The new Eidolon matchmaking that you can access from Konzu's bounty screen at night are simply drop-in missions. Similar to bounties, you basically just pub it and then you enter the planes. For something that requires specific team composition and strategy, you would think that these Eidolon matchmaking systems would at least be a pre-game lobby system like Payday 2, where before you enter the heist, you can discuss your loadouts and strategy before going in. As of this time, the Eidolon bounties even allow you to be matchmade with people who have not completed the War Within or even met Onko, which results in hilarious instances where you are matchmade with people who cannot even damage the Eidolon. Now, there's other problems with the new Eidolons as well on a technical level. First of all, their hitboxes are super janky, sometimes with spot-on shots I was hitting 0 damage. And yes, the shields were down. And sometimes the new Eidolons teleport for no reason whatsoever, even if they have lures attached to them. So far with the new Eidolons, what worries me is that DE is simply recycling material. They are not actually putting effort into properly developing the Eidolons as unique enemies, each with their own strengths and weaknesses or kill methods. There is the upcoming Flying Eidolon, which was teased on Devstream, which I sincerely hope is actually unique, with different kill mechanics and actual team play. But it remains to be seen if it is an actual game changer or it is the same thing all over again, just repackaged with wings. I would also like to address my concerns with how PoE as a whole is being handled. I am personally very worried with how DE has been recently handling the planes and their ways to make players play it. When Planes of Eidolon first came out, I was really excited to try it out and explore its mechanics and landscape. However, that hype has clearly not lasted for me, and I suspect much of the community as well. Once you have explored the planes, there is not much reason to stay. Planes of Eidolon is an extremely closed-loop progression, with little to none of its systems contributing to the rest of the star chart progression. Operator amps are the most powerful things that players take out of this loop. And even then, they don't really do much in actual in-game combat, and they are mostly designed for you to deal with Eidolons efficiently. And this brings me to how DE has been trying to get players to re-enter the planes. Instead of actually designing new and interesting mechanics, as well as rewards that actually incentivize and excite players to re-enter the planes, DE has disappointingly chosen to strong-arm the planes upon its player base. For example, by recently making Unvault relics only farmable from planes bounties or syndicate packs, or by the recent wave of new PoE based Riven Unveil objectives such as kill a Dagrin with a bow while downed or stuff like that, and moving Arcanes from trials to Eidolons, it becomes very evident that DE has chosen to put existing systems and coveted items that people all want into the planes, which forces us to play it if we wish to obtain these coveted items. This is incredibly disappointing, as it suggests that DE would rather force players into playing planes by putting all the coveted shinies people want into it, than actually spend time and effort actually adding new and unique rewards into the planes that would actually excite people into playing it, rather than have them reluctantly play it just because they need the stuff that's in there. Now, I understand DE has spent a lot of sweat and tears on PoE. It's their baby, their precious little project, but by shoving every good thing into PoE and forcing players into playing that way, they are not only sacrificing the long-term aspects of other game systems for short-term player retention, but they're also creating a loot cave problem for themselves, where they concentrate all the best drops in one place. The other game modes and areas of Warframe will simply end up suffering for it in the long term. There are further concerns that I have with DE's recent actions, and that is the way they treat their veteran player base as well as content that has aged. To fully understand this concern, you need to look into DE's design philosophy. If you have not already caught on, DE has a very bad habit of creating new flashy content that is meant to appeal to what is hot and new in the game market. Trials were designed around the same time as Destiny, and some people theorize that it was a way to attract disgruntled Destiny players, who found that game's raids and gameplay underwhelming. Planes of Eidolon was created in response to the rise of things like Destiny 2 and to capitalize off the open world exosuit hype that Anthem teased to people at E3. The problem does not lie in DE's creation of said content per se. It's an incredibly smart strategy to base your content on what is hot and new, and I give them credit for it. The problem lies in the fact that in the case of things like trials, they are incredibly rushed and poorly coded simply to meet a deadline and possibly because they want to capture the market. DE's business model unfortunately revolves around often releasing half-baked content, and only further iterating on it if it is well received. It is a kind of test the water and we'll improve on it if they like it kind of model. The trials are a very good example of this. They were built on really bad spaghetti code, whether by laziness or, they were rushing it. The trials ended up breaking every other update whenever something else in the game changed. And this is a problem that DE often creates for itself. By rushing out certain content, they end up creating long-term problems for themselves that could have been solved with a cleaner base code. In the case of Trials, after JV, DE decided to stop development of Trials completely, and from there on, they just decided to half-heartedly fix raids every update, knowing that, the next hotfix it will break again. And all this while, they probably didn't change any of the base code to fix the spaghetti bugs, which is kind of weird. You would think that in the case of DE, they would at least have said, why does this pipe burst every update? Maybe we should do something about the water pressure. But no, they didn't. And so this led up to today, where they decided they no longer wanted to maintain this barely breathing husk of a game mode, despite its very loyal and tightly knit player base. It's also worth noting that trials are an exception to the norm when it comes to content that has quote-unquote failed. Most of the content that DEA bombs usually tapers off in a few months, like for example Lunaro, which from what I know, even Conclave communities have shunned and no one plays it or fixes it anymore. While in the case of Trials, it's a bit of a miracle because it actually managed to survive and cultivate a small but dedicated following over the past 3 years. And so my concern is this, that these actions on Trials sets an incredibly worrying precedent. It sends the message that any piece of content in the game, no matter if it has a strong community built around it, is liable to be removed indefinitely once the developer deems it not fitting with the core gameplay, which, might I add, is by their own standards and vision.
And a lot of the communities of these, it is a smaller community within the bigger picture of Warframe, but they are very passionate about their trials, their speed runs, the arcane market, the communities they have, whatever one of these, it may be all, it may be none, the communities they play with. So
if I had to guess, I think it would be more of a redesign to fit better with maybe the core gameplay of Warframe. Right now, they kind of push to a section of stand still on the spot, do this weird designer puzzle, and it kind of doesn't really fit with the game anymore.
It sends the worrying message that despite the raid community's massive protests and overwhelmingly negative feedback on the removal of raids, they remain adamant about their decision and ignore this request. And this is incredibly dangerous to any Warframe veteran. This means that any piece of content that you love, that you made friends through and play with every single day, is liable to be removed at the developer's whim. If your numbers are not big enough and you cause too much trouble for them, you're not worth their time. There is now no stability of content for veterans, and there is no assurance that people who enjoy other types of fringe content in Warframe, like Conclave, are safe from this change. And it would honestly not surprise me that if in a few years' time, Plains of Eidolon itself, once it has outlived its hype and force-fed content, while bogging down the dev teams with multiple bugs and low player numbers, would suffer the same fate as Trials. Possibly having its rewards cannibalized to be fed into D's new shiny project. If you take off the hype glasses, Plains is not that different from Trials. It has its fair share of bugs, performance issues, and it usually also breaks every other hotfix. The main difference here is that it has a much higher player base because it had an entire marketing campaign centered around it, and it is also because it is the current subject of affection for DE. If player engagement and developer interest in Plains dies off, it will be subject to potentially the same fate as Trials. Now, instead of just analyzing and criticizing, I would also like to extend the olive branch of some sort and say I would like to give these suggestions on how to solve this community crisis down the line. First of all, it seems that at this point DE has ignored all the feedback that the raid community put out to not remove Trials. And unfortunately, they are dead set on this decision. First of all, this is not how you treat your veteran player base. If a community for a certain type of content tells you an overwhelmingly no, and you still push through with it, then there's already a problem. However, what DE has done is above and beyond this. They not only ignored the feedback that told them not to do it, but they have also made no effort to interact with this feedback meaningfully on any platform whatsoever. To ignore feedback and strong arm changes is not the hallmark of a respectable developer. Now, if DE had at least set out some of the most major concerns of the community collected on the forum thread, and they had a proper sit-down discussion for at least like 10 to 15 minutes, actually discussing some of them, as well as maybe if they had told the community how they were sorry, and maybe hinted, here's how we intend to rework trials in the future, the community would not be as incensed as it is right now. However, to DE, there is still a way for you to prove yourself. The community currently feels betrayed and neglected, but you can start making amends by living up to your promises. Now, in the Warframe forum thread, Megan's post wrote this. This is not the end to trials. Our designers have put in an incredible amount of sweat, blood and tears into creating, fixing and maintaining trials, not to mention the blood, sweat and tears you as a community have put into them. We welcome this thread as a home of constructive feedback where you would improve trials. Raid School Bus, I'm looking at you. We have some top level ideas to revisit in the distant future in terms of a redesign, but welcome the years of a 2+ year mechanic that a good amount of Tenno are familiar with. Whether to simply appease the community or otherwise, DE has stated that it values the trials community and wishes to gather constructive feedback on trials. This is how DE has an opportunity to redeem itself. Now, to DE, if you truly value the trial veteran player base, then prove it to us. Show that you care about our feedback, and show that you want our active involvement in the process. If you truly care, set up a dedicated feedback channel or Discord server with the veteran members of RSB, as well as trial veterans from other communities and trial-based content creators, for them to all pitch in as a community. The raid community knows far more about trials than DE itself could ever hope to. It knows every nook, cranny, every loose screw and buggy mess. The RSB is also an organization that specializes in teaching new players the trials, and they will know what will most efficiently enhance the new player experience and the general accessibility of the game mode in the future. From an objective point of view, the trial community is such a massive library and resource of knowledge for trial redevelopment that you would have to be an idiot to ignore it or turn it down. So, to DE, if you truly care, bring the community on board with this. A sort of trial design council, if you will. Let us vet your ideas and tell you whether they are good from a player perspective, rather than have you release them and then let them flop because they were not in touch with what the player base wants. Let us tell you where the pitfalls and potential bugs will be, so you can have a cleaner code less vulnerable to spaghetti breakage. Let us tell you how to open up this style of gameplay to the wider player base. Prove to us that you care about the veterans' opinions and feelings, and we will gladly help you rebuild trials into a less buggy, more accessible and more fun version of what they are today. We might even cut down development time for you by helping you through the major difficult decisions and gameplay aspects, which will result in the earlier return of trials that were also crafted by the community. We are more than willing to help you on a level deeper than just walls of forum posts. We are willing to actively be part of the trial rebuilding process. You yourselves mentioned that we are a passionate community. Show us that you are willing to harness that passion. At the end of the day, my question to DE is this. Do you want to live up to your promise? You have a very good chance to redeem yourself here. Or do you want to confirm our fears that whatever you were saying about appreciating the community was just hyperbole meant to, pay lip service to the community, and that in reality you don't care about the veteran player base. The choice is yours. We are here, we are ready, we are willing to help. The only question that remains is whether you want our help or not. Thank you for watching the video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that I put my points forward clearly and it made sense. I would also like to thank anyone who has either left a supportive comment or left a constructive comment on my previous video. Thank you for contributing positively to the discussion. A point I want to make is that I do not need you to agree with me. All I ask is that you put forward your counterpoints in a constructive fashion. If you're gonna come to this video and respond, hey, local man complains for 1 hour straight, you are missing the point. Because that is the kind of comment that does not solve anything. Now, another point I want to make before ending the video is that I am not the worst affected by this change. A lot of people seem to think that my channel is completely based on raids, and that's not exactly true. My channel specializes in breaking the game in fun ways. It just so happened that trials were the best way to break the game because you could have the interaction between 8 players' powers instead of 4. Now, with the removal of raids, I am still somewhat fine because I can adapt and meme other stuff. In the case of some other partners, they are not so lucky. And one of the partners that I want to put a spotlight on is Zopni. For those of you who don't know who Zopni is, he is a Warframe speedrunner. His entire channel and his formats are based around speedrunning Warframe. With the recent changes and removal of trials, Zopni has essentially had the entire floor pulled out from beneath him. This is because his in-game clan, Dict, I hope I spelled that right, is primarily a trial speedrunning clan. With the removal of trials, I think about 80% of his clan is actually considering quitting, which would effectively kill off his clan. Not to mention that his community, the Warframe speedrunning community, is held together mainly by trials. Trials are the main means by which most speedrunners in Warframe compare against each other. On top of this, if you go to his Twitch or his YouTube videos, you will notice that his most viewed content is based around raids. Essentially for Zopni, there is no way he can recover from this without completely rebranding his channel as something else. And that's actually really, really terrible. If you have the time and the heart, I would like to ask of you on my behalf to visit Zopni's YouTube and Twitch channels, follow him on Twitch, subscribe to him on YouTube, watch his content, and maybe even let him know that, you understand his situation, and just send him some overall moral support in this tough time. So yeah, that's it for the video. Thank you once again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.